Have you ever imagined a plane disappearing in midair and reappearing 37 years later, as if time had simply stood still? A commercial flight full of passengers that took off normally flew through the skies and, without explanation, vanished from the radar. No distress call, no explosion, nothing. Just silence and emptiness. But the scariest part is what came next. This same plane allegedly reappeared decades later, with the pilot still believing it was 1955. Sounds like a movie script, doesn't it? But what if I told you that this story was reported by journalistic sources, by eyewitnesses, and even by air traffic controllers who claim to have seen the plane land out of nowhere? Today you will learn about the mystery of Pan American Airways Flight 912, one of the most frightening and enigmatic cases in modern aviation. Prepare yourself, because what you're about to hear will challenge everything you believe about time, space, and reality. It was July 2, 1955. Pan Am Flight 914, a Douglas DC-4, was preparing to take off from New York's airport bound for Miami, Florida. The sky was clear, the weather forecast was favorable, and the aircraft carried 57 passengers and 4 crew members. Everything seemed absolutely normal. The flight plan had been approved, and the crew followed all routine procedures. At 9:05 a.m., the plane left the ground, climbing calmly southward. Minutes later, the pilot contacted the tower, confirming altitude and position. Everything was fine, but then silence took over the frequency. Without any warning, Flight 914 simply disappeared from the radars. No call for help, no emergency signal. Controllers tried to make contact several times, but there was no response. It was as if the plane had been erased from the map. Within hours, news of the disappearance spread. The Coast Guard began intensive searches along the entire route, from the Atlantic to the Gulf of Florida. Planes, helicopters, and ships swept the area, but nothing was found. No wreckage, no sign of fuel, nothing. It was as if Flight 914 had been swallowed by the sky. Pan Am officially declared it missing, and all 61 occupants were presumed dead. The case was filed as one of the greatest mysteries in civil aviation, and so it remained for almost 4 decades. But what happened 37 years later would change everything. We fast forward in time to September 9th, 1992. The location, Caracas Airport, Venezuela. The day was running normally until something unexpected appeared on the radars. A strange echo appeared, a plane approaching but with no flight plan, no identification, and an old radio frequency completely outside of modern standards. The traffic controller tried to make contact, and the response that came from the other side left everyone in shock. A calm and confident voice replied, "This is Pan American Flight 914 from New York to Miami. We have 57 passengers on board and are at an altitude of 1,800 meters. We request authorization to land." The controller, confused, looked at the clock. It was 1992. How could a Pan Am flight, with that number and that model of plane, be in the air? The company had gone bankrupt the previous year, and that type of aircraft, the Douglas DC-4, hadn't flown in decades. Nevertheless, trying to remain calm, he replied that the airport was not Miami, but Caracas, Venezuela. There was a brief silence. Then the pilot replied, "What do you mean? Our flight took off 3 hours ago. We are following the route plan normally." At that moment, the controller realized something unbelievable. The plane appearing on the radar corresponded exactly to the model that disappeared in 1955. Pan Am Flight 914, considered lost for 37 years, was back. Crossing the skies of Venezuela, the control towers authorized the landing. When the plane finally touched the ground, what was seen was worthy of a nightmare. The aircraft was in perfect condition, but with an old paint job, with the Pan Am logo from the 50s and design details that hadn't existed for decades. The airport staff approached with caution. Inside the cabin, the pilot seemed disoriented. He opened the window and asked aloud, "Where are we? What airport is this?" The controller replied, "Caracas, Venezuela. Today is September 9th, 1992. According to witnesses, the pilot turned pale, looked around, and was completely speechless. He mumbled something unintelligible, and before any authority could approach, started the engines again. In a few seconds, the plane accelerated and took off, disappearing into the horizon before everyone's eyes. No radar registered its destination. No country reported the entry of a similar aircraft into its airspace. Flight 912 disappeared for the second time. Days later, Venezuelan newspapers began to publish unbelievable headlines. Plane missing in 1955 reappears in Caracas. There were witness reports, alleged photos, and even partial transcripts of the conversations between the pilot and the tower. But mysteriously, a short time later, all the reports were taken down. The printed copies disappeared, and the journalists who had broken the news simply vanished. The official report from the Venezuelan Aviation Authority was never released, and airport employees claimed they were visited by American agents who asked for absolute silence. After that, the case was buried. No explanation, no closure, just silence and doubt. And that's when the theories began, some plausible, others completely disturbing. The first one is the most popular, the time travel theory. Many believe that Flight 914 entered a time rift, a sort of dimensional portal that instantly transported it from 1955 to 1992. This idea is reinforced by reports of magnetic anomalies on the flight's original route, phenomena that could, in theory, distort space-time. Skeptical scientists dismiss this possibility, but defenders of quantum physics remind us that wormholes are indeed mathematically predicted. What if the plane had crossed one of these phenomena? What if, for some reason, it simply jumped through time without its occupants even noticing? Another, darker theory points to secret experiments. According to this hypothesis, Flight 914 was part of a top-secret military project, possibly linked to the famous Philadelphia experiment, in which the US Navy allegedly tried to make a ship invisible to radar in the 1940s. Pan Am, according to conspiracy theorists, collaborated on tests of temporal cloaking technology on civilian aircraft, but something went wrong. The plane, instead of just disappearing from radar, disappeared completely from the timeline. This theory, though it seems absurd, finds echoes in supposed confidential documents and accounts from former Pan Am employees who claim to have heard stories about flights that never returned. There is also the government cover-up theory. Many believe that the plane did indeed land in Caracas, but that the US government intervened immediately, confiscated the aircraft, and silenced all witnesses. The objective? To hide involvement in temporal experiments, abductions, or even extraterrestrial contact. According to this version, Flight 914 never took off again. What people saw later was a simulation, created to feed the myth and divert attention from the truth, a truth that involved technology beyond our comprehension. But there are also the skeptics. They claim it's all just an urban legend, born from sensationalist publications, especially an American magazine called Weekly World News, known for publishing absurd stories in the 80s and 90s. According to them, the case of Flight 914 is entirely fictitious. However, there is something curious. Photos, newspaper clippings, and even radio reports from the time mention strange communications from a Pan Am Flight 942. None of this has ever been proven, but it has also never been fully debunked. And this lack of an official denial is what keeps the flame of the mystery alive to this day. There are still those who associate the disappearance of Flight 914 with phenomena like the Bermuda Triangle, a region notorious for swallowing planes and ships without a trace. Some believe the plane may have passed through one of these anomalous zones where time and space behave differently, and that for some reason it returned decades later, only to be pulled back into the void. Others, more spiritual, say the flight entered an intermediate dimension, a limbo between life and death, and when it returned, it no longer fully belonged to this world. What is most disturbing is that to this day, there is no official Pan Am record of Flight 914. This becomes even more suspicious when we remember that in 1991, shortly before its supposed reappearance, the company went bankrupt and destroyed most of its archives. A coincidence? Or an attempt to erase the last evidence of a secret that could never be revealed? Skeptics say yes, it's a coincidence. But for those who believe none of this is by chance, they claim there is hidden proof that documents have disappeared and that witnesses have been silenced. And even if the case were just a fabrication, why has no one ever come forward to officially deny it? Why did Pan Am itself, during all the years it existed, never make a statement? What if in fact Flight 914 crossed the limits of what we know and was swallowed into some point beyond time? Perhaps we will never know. Perhaps the plane simply got lost in a space that belongs neither to the past nor the future. Perhaps it is still there, flying over a sky that is not ours in a parallel timeline where the clock stopped in 1955. The mystery of Pan Am Flight 914 remains one of the most fascinating enigmas in history. A story that mixes fear, science, faith, and conspiracy. Maybe the plane never existed. Maybe it was just a journalist's invention. But maybe it was real, and maybe somewhere in the distant sky it is still flying. Trapped between two eras, two dimensions, two realities, waiting for the moment to finally land. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear more mysterious stories like this, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss any new mysteries.